Hello, hello everyone. So, welcome to my first live stream ever. Gonna be a bit awkward on my end, so please forgive me if I do misstep here and there. So, as I've mentioned in all the comments leading up to this is gonna be a chat about, maps, cartography, stuff like that. Uh, yeah, Unconquered might be a good idea to have sound on. Hi, Daniel. Okay, so what I want to start up with first today is actually showcasing some of the stuff you can do, and maybe also show you guys that it just takes a lot of work, obviously, to get good over long term, but it's more than worth it. I've taken the time earlier today to actually assemble basically a whole lot of maps I made over the years. Um, you expected a darker voice, okay? Well, sorry for that. Voices as it is. Okay, so to give you a bit of background, maybe on the whole fairly niche map making thing, I have always been, yeah, get good. I've always been pretty much, well, a map junkie. Even when I was little, I remember times when I was maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, where I was just drawing maps on random sheets of paper and showing them to my mom or my dad, and yeah, it's only went downhill from there. So, yeah, without further ado, let me show you some of the stuff I've done over the years. So, as I've mentioned, I've started largely doing maps by hand, as you can see here. Some solid German in here as well for those of you that are able of the language. So yeah, these are actually not all that old, maybe 10 years by now or so. Map making by hand is obviously to a certain degree easier since you usually know the forms, you know just the triangles for the mountains, all the bubbles for the woodlands are relatively easy, straightforward, and you can just draw the smooth lines as you want them. So yeah, just a few different ones for show. They're all fairly similar here, these hand-drawn maps of old. Been quite a while since I actually done some of those. This one here is a bit of a specialty, actually. I think that was the first really proper town map I've ever done. Uh, yeah, I might actually look to see if I find some of those very old things. Like, I can show you the beginnings of my digital map making. Those I still found, but all those old maps, I'm not sure I'll be lucky on that part. I mean, even those here are already somewhat old, at 10-ish years maybe. But yeah, this here is Spannon's Crossing, one of my first maps to actually draw kind of a town from top down. And if you take a closer look, the shading makes no sense whatsoever. But I think in the grand scheme of things, I think I've gotten something workable here. But yeah, that shading. So, this here is actually part of a somewhat more recent project. Very tiny island here. Let me see, where do I have it? I may have put it in the wrong folder. Let me quickly check. Well, apparently I put it in a completely wrong folder because I can't find it. Yeah, well, how about that? So essentially I have a, I would say about 80 centimeters long and only about 10 centimeters high sheet of paper. A very, very long stretch, which I've started making a map on. And the whole idea is to chronicle kind of like a journey across the seas through multiple islands and finding another continent. And that thing will probably take a while to finish if I ever get around to it. I'm really bad at finishing stuff like that. So yeah, basically that's just hand-drawn stuff. Again, don't mind the shading overly much. Just some of my kind of like last really detailed hand-drawn maps. That's a problem, Moldova. I don't know the name. It's I had to get it from somewhere. I posted it online many years ago, and that was a hell of a search. And yeah. Oh no! Wait! I have the wrong one in my mind. No, that still has just an IMG underscore and some random number. I'll probably post it in the Discord at some point. But for now, let's quickly continue. Showing you some of my fantasy maps now. So here is actually where I can show you some of my first digital artwork, basically. Like, yeah, let's start with that one over here. Fairly small crop out from a larger map. The larger map actually was gigantically huge, one of my Photoshop projects of very old. And I put something like 100 hours into the map, and then accidentally completely deleted the file. No backups. Believe me, that one hurt. And yeah, as you can see over here, this map, it's fairly basic. Like, the mountains are just like hand-drawn ones, the forests are just green blobs with some shading, water here and there, and really fancy and nearly unreadable font. Yeah, that's one of my first tries. Basically just scanning a map and redrawing the mountains and going from there. I started doing a whole lot of Photoshop related tutorials back then. And this abomination here is one of the kind of next tries. Fairly advanced in air quotes for my skill at the time. Yeah, it's really not holding up to snuff nowadays. But you gotta start somewhere. And yeah, as you can see, yeah, just a whole bunch of grasslands, as if the entire world consists of grass. Bunch of forests, a bunch of seas, and not much else to it really. I think I abandoned this map relatively quickly because the style really didn't work out for me. And then after a couple months of work actually, I've stumbled upon a tutorial someone made. I'm gonna actually link that tutorial later for people interested. And that tutorial led very quickly to a completely new style of maps. So, as you can see here in this map, stuff already looks a lot better. Sadly, I don't have many of the original maps I did way back when, the first experiments in this style, but this is fairly close. These photorealistic satellite-style maps, you know, I actually, when I read the tutorials for this style, decided that I didn't like some parts the artist used. Notably the forests. He used a solid texture and some other shenanigans to make forests. I decided that this wasn't quite what I liked, and I decided to go for a bit of a scatter brush here. That's actually some of the stuff I'm going to show you later in Photoshop if we get to that. And yeah, the main part that makes these maps really pop out, and why it's stuck around as my base style for many years, is just the mountains look gorgeous, I feel. Like, that style of mountain just pops, it works. And that's what you're gonna see now in a few different versions, basically. So, let's start with this here then. This here is a map some of my role-playing group, Treasure and Cherish. It's for a setting I made for D&D 4th edition fair few years ago by now. Yeah, a fairly desolate place, fairly dark. The whole setting was pretty much into the dark fantasy genre. So there's that. Again, you can see the mountains really pop off. They just work. Forests still have the same style, a bit of a drop shading, and oh, thanks. Yeah, the the empty legend. It's a map I wanted to go a lot further with. You can still see down here in the middle of the sea, I actually have the various templates I used for location names, island names, and the like, and yeah, never got around to finishing it, sadly. That's, by the way, a running theme. You'll see that now and then. So, yeah, at some point I decided to try out something different. This is a map some of you may know. I know from the names, a fair few of you are from the Exalted Discord. And this here is essentially my first campaign map for Exalted 3rd Edition. I decided to create. It's somewhere in the southeast, about 1,000 miles south of the Prasadi Empire's capital. And while it served the job, it was a very different style than I usually use, as you can very easily see here. And yeah, at some point I also decided, yeah, this is not exactly what I want. I want something better, you know? By that point in time, I've actually managed to go through an entire apprenticeship, 3 years in Germany, where you learn a trade. And I've since then become essentially a layouter, graphics design, stuff like that. That's my day job, essentially. And yeah, during that time, I learned a whole load of new tricks. And those tricks I then used, applied, and came out with... Where do we have it? It escapes me at the moment. There we go. This map over here. This is probably my favorite personal project. If you look at things, let me actually swap between them real quick. If you look at things, those maps are fairly similar from the outline. And yeah, just entirely different style, a lot more detail. And this is probably the map I'm proudest of at the moment. This is the one that just worked the best. Happy to hear that, Moldova. If you're talking about that one and I didn't miss a step in there, then yeah, this map is probably the best I've ever done. So yeah, there's actually also a couple dozen, if not hundreds, of pages there for actual content. Like I have a Scrivener project where I note down all the details of the setting, and thanks again, man. And yeah, there's just a lot of content there. I still hope to get to explore it more in actual play. For the moment, though, as some of you may know, I've put Exalted to the side and delved into Dungeon World, which is actually where we'll go next. So, maybe 2 years ago or so, I actually stumbled across a tool. You can see it here in the background. Inkarnate. Inkarnate is a online mapmaking tool, and way back then it was a fair bit less awesome than it is today. But still, I decided, hey, let's give this a whirl. Let's see what you can do with it. And that's one of the first experiments I ever did with it. It's looking awesome, I feel. Even today, this map, small as it is, holds up, and it showcases why Inkarnate is as cool as it is. So, yeah, I've expanded my skills, you could say, in Inkarnate a little bit more in recent times. This is one of the campaign maps for the Dungeon World me and my group are playing at the moment. We're still down here in Wolstenberg. And yeah, being the map nerd I am, I decided at some point, yeah, these maps here are much larger than the original size they allowed for in Inkarnate, but it's not enough for me. So yeah, I decided to apply Photoshop. This load may take a few seconds here, and went to basically assemble multiple maps into a larger canvas, as can be seen here. And this is currently one of my pet projects. The World of Nivian is the current working title, and yeah, there's a lot to it, and I really enjoyed doing this. This is the fruits of maybe a week of labor. Let me quickly read something in chat here. And yes, Angela, I am more than willing to take questions. Actually, yes, continent shapes. And yeah, when in doubt, make it bigger. That's indeed kind of my philosophy with maps. Continent shapes is something I can really, really easily help you out with. That's one of the big Photoshop tricks I'm gonna show later. It's a very, very, very easy, though somewhat time-intense process, but what you end up with are amazing fractal coastlines. To give you a showcase of that, actually, let me pull out another map I did. Also for Exalted, by the way. So, take a look at these coastlines, and personally, I feel these coastlines do look fairly natural, you know? That they have just this kind of like random but sensible construction to them. There's small inlets, there's bays, there's long stretches of somewhat straight lines. Yeah, just these coastlines look pretty good, I feel. And making those is actually really, really easy. I'm gonna get to that later. My current plan is to show off, starting in a few moments, essentially Inkarnate some more, and then go to Photoshop, and after that show some stuff in Illustrator. So, cool, you're starting actually in the Sundials. Like, honestly, if you want, I can just remove all the cities from the map and hand it to your game master. Like, serious offer here. Because this shit is awesome. This map has never seen use, which I'm kind of unhappy about. But yeah, things just didn't go as planned way back then. I'll leave it at that. So, this is all fantasy stuff. Next up, we're gonna switch over to some science fiction. Let's start with something also fairly old here. Oh yeah, Dapsticks. Sure, I'll ask her. I can maybe even slap down some icons for new cities if she wants. Or, I think she, yeah, for them. Let's say like that. But yeah, essentially, this here is, as you can hopefully see, one of my early works still. Basically trying to get what you see here just not that bad. Like, if you actually take a look, the entire map here is still flat 2D, top-down view, without any curvature or anything. You can see it especially with that island, it looks horrendous. Something that went a little better is actually this here. This is supposed to be a moon with a thin, dusty atmosphere. Needed a larger resolution for the texture, but otherwise this is more or less fine. Some of the actually more interesting stuff I'm currently doing, preparing for a possible science fiction RPG campaign in the Apocalypse world setting. Yeah, I actually think the first planet, it has a certain charm to it indeed. It's actually not all too bad for a first try, I'd say, but still. I hopefully can do better today. I may actually give that a try at some point, you know? But that's gonna have to wait for a different time. So, this here is what I'm gonna showcase as the third and last tool for today. In Illustrator, I created this here. This is just a intentionally fairly neutral, fairly down-to-earth looking star map. These are essentially large star systems that are connected by preset hyperlanes, and they all have a name to whom they belong. The name, obviously, of the place itself, and a population number that's always rounded to the last 10. I mean, it's the future. Instant census be awesome. So yeah, this map is probably my current favorite to just work on, because it's really simple. You just need to get stuff done. And yeah, get my Stellaris on. I'm actually currently playing a Stellaris game again. Really enjoying that. Fanatic materialists with authoritarianism. That's how you say it? You know what I mean. And as per usual, the whole game kind of turned into everyone come to my empire, I'm gonna integrate you and we're super powerful together, yay. I know I'm a bit of a weird Stellaris player in that. And yet, do you ever stop playing Stellaris? That's a good question. Personally, I'm often convinced that you don't really stop playing Stellaris, you just wait till the next patch, which is an endless cycle. Yeah, if you never start, then truly. But if you never started, you should try it, oh my god. So yeah, before I drag around this map eternally, yeah, this is just one of the things you can do in Illustrator. So next up, actually is something that belongs to the same universe, more like. This is kind of a system view, intentionally fairly basic again, and with largely just icons. You know, there's no big graphics for planets or anything, just the planet itself, how many moons, asteroid belts, possible stations at some point, and I've set up a whole system of classifying these planets into certain groups and stuff like that. Yeah, just being a nerd. After that, the last thing I want to show you before we actually delve into stuff, you know, how it works, how Inkarnate works, is Warhammer 40k. I am somewhat of a big 40k nerd. I love a lot of that stuff. Thanks, Momo. And essentially, at some point, I decided I played together with a friend 40k, kind of more of a story-driven idea. You know, he was playing a Imperial Guard regiment and still being built up. I was throwing some challenges, and yeah, we kind of went from there. And map nerd that I am, I decided, you know, this definitely needs something more awesome. So I decided to create a segment, a sector map for Warhammer 40k. This one here is the first of 4 I did over the years, made specifically for, I think it was just the Imperial Guard regiment. Can I actually still find it? Kalidas, over here somewhere we played. So essentially, I've set up myself a legend of the various types of worlds, somewhat more expanded than the most basic stuff, and then decided go for it. And if you're familiar with 40k lore, you are probably aware of what the lower right here means. Nom nom tasty planets. Feel free to show them. I actually have 4 of them. And he may already know them. I've spread them around on various 40k resource websites in the past. I actually did some other stuff for 40k. At some point, I played with a few more people in the Only War RPG system. And let me actually quickly see if I can find it. Because, as we mentioned before, I'm not one for doing stuff half measure. So this here, just as a quick showcase, is what I did. This is an accounting of every single squad in the first Crimean founding. And if we go down to insane levels, the drop troopers, like 9,000 guardsmen, they each have a colonel, they have a regimental commissar, they have a company major, and they have the lieutenants for the various platoons. So, yeah, and honestly, this is not shitting you. Every single name is unique on that entire crazy thing. I like it going crazy. So yeah, that's some of the stuff I do. I also have a personnel file that I kind of also spread around and expanded on later for essentially just noting details about characters for especially kind of like an addition to the Only War RPG again. So yeah, sorry for that small interlude here. And yeah, honestly, seeing that SO and E chart, sometimes I kind of overdo it. But yeah, after showing you the Kalidas sector here, let's quickly go through the others I made. The second one I ever created is the Karsus sector, which was essentially for exactly that thing you just seen, the force organization table. we should, it's there, Krim. That's where the player characters all came from, and went to war over here on the system of Brunt. And yeah, this is also a very nice sector, I feel. A lot of stuff to do. There's two more. There's the Arkan Expanse for a trial run at Rogue Trader that didn't last very long. You know, the Arkan Shroud and the Emperor's Lash, two anomalies that kind of kept this space beyond Imperial control for the longest time. And then it opens at a certain point, and Rogue Traders, ho. I think if you know 40k, you can imagine the rest. Profit, murder, and genocide. 40k staples. And something I actually didn't do for myself, that's more of a I'm bored, let's do a map type situation, is over here, the Arguvican sector. That's actually near the start of my apprenticeship I told you about, the 3 years learning how to do graphics, basically. And I think you can see it in comparison to the other maps. There's just a tad more, it looks more clean. Yeah, it just looks better a little bit, I feel. Okay, but that's that. Let's call the showcase quits here. This is stuff you can do if you actually invest some time into cartography, you know? I think it's an invaluable resource to many a game master. And yeah, I'm gonna show you some stuff now. Give me a few moments here real quick. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna go to Inkarnate now. Inkarnate, as I mentioned in the video I did recently on YouTube, is a free service, baseline, that allows you to do these maps. You can also go ahead and subscribe for, I think, $5 a month, not that much. I mean, if you want, feel free to send them over to him if he likes that shit. I'm more than happy to see the maps actually find use. So yeah, as I was saying, you can subscribe to Inkarnate, and for that you get the pro maps and a lot more icons. So let's actually start a new map over here. Yeah, the $20 a year is what I did, because that's a steal, like seriously. Okay, so you start off with a completely empty map. And you have these various tools. To very quickly go through them, in case you haven't seen the YouTube video yet, you have a landscaping tool where you can place land or subtract land. You can select the size of your brush, and you can go with circle, block, or hex as base forms. You have, for that I actually need some land. You have texture drawing, where you can, just like before, choose the shape of your brush, the size, and how soft the edges, and then just select textures and draw them in. And this is one of the actual key lessons I learned over the years making maps digitally. If there's one thing you can't work without, it's quite simply textures. You need them. Preferably a lot of them. So yeah, next up you have a icon placing toolset. Allows you to choose from a whole boatload of these icons here. And this is the selection you get for actually having a subscription. If you don't have a subscription, you'll see a fair few icons less on here. So yeah, we just go ahead and place a sea monster and up its size dramatically, because who doesn't want Nessie, right? You have a second icon tool. This one is kind of more like a spray can of sorts. Like, these are all icons that are supposed to be used in high repetitive patterns. The trees, for example. Let's go down the size again and just paint in a forest. There you go. That's what this tool does. Then you have a text tool. You can just place it and enter text. You can select from 4 fonts. You can select the size, if it's bold or not. Usually bold is a lot better. And then you can select the color and the color of the shadow. Personally, I don't use this tool, largely for the simple reason of I have Photoshop. You know, I spent a lot of money on Photoshop, so I'm gonna use it. Photoshop allows you to be a fair bit more detailed on that front, obviously, so that's the advantages there. You can attach notes. This is helpful for game masters that will use this map tool during a session to make notes and stuff like that. Just place it here and yada, yada, yada. And then it will show up, and you can always just be like, hey, yeah, what's in here? And the good thing is, it disappears in every other mode. You have a grid mode as well, in case you really want hex grid, for example. Fairly useful if you're doing more of a hex exploration setting, maybe. And as mentioned before, you can fairly precisely go at it with the hex tool. If you see now, it snaps to the grid. And that obviously allows you to use Inkarnate kind of like a bit of hexographer, maybe. Obviously less detailed from what I know. Hexographer is fairly dense from what I've seen. Not quite my tool, but you know. And yeah, then you have a zoom tool. You have the settings where you can enter a map title and a description. You can save it, obviously, and you can export it as an image file. So yeah, in essence, let's go ahead. Disable the grid, actually, because I don't like a grid. There we go. Circle, yeah. Okay, so what do we want to do here? Cool. I actually haven't looked all too deeply at Hexographer. I may actually give it another look somewhat soon, but at the moment I'm plenty happy with this tool over here, and with obviously Photoshop and Illustrator. But it's something I've been wanting to give a try for a while now. I mean, way back when I was like 9, 10 or so, my brother got into role-playing games. He actually is the one that got me involved there as well by proxy. And yeah, from there on, during various car drives with my parents, when we went to various places, long drives like that, we would kind of do like hex crawl exploration on the fly. Not hexes though, we always had the graph paper, so we used that. That was weirdly fun way back then. I don't remember much of it, but just remember that we did it, and at some point he was not happy how it was going. It was just rocks fall, everyone dies. So first experience with that trope came pretty early. So I'm gonna take a drink real quick. Just a second, please. There we go. So, any of you have input on what type of map I should do here, feel free to let me know. I'm more than willing to just take some suggestions and run with them. So, usually what I do first is just block out regions where I know, hey, here's gonna be landmass. Kind of like a first big step. So, in this case here, unless someone has a specific request, we're gonna do a large landmass up here, a bit down here, and an island that kind of blocks the strait. So, anyone has any request or something? Maybe a quick sketch you want me to put into Shapereel here? Just let me know real quick. I'll just wait for a few moments and basically just talk about how I would go about doing things. So, after doing the first rough coastline, I scale down the size of the brush a fair bit and zoom in. And then I'll just draw the more detailed coastline. What's important here is to get at least somewhat solid baseline for the coast. Just draw along, wiggle your mouse, sometimes just, you know, break out a little bit, stuff like that. It's really not much more than essentially just wiggling about the mouse, to be honest. Fill in some of the blanks in here. And this method will very quickly already lead you to a very passable coastline, especially if you go fairly small with a brush size. There we go. Let's backfill here. And the last bit over here for the northern continent. Okay, so let's zoom out, take a look. And you can see, if we actually untexture all of this so it looks similar, it's already gotten a bit more of a realistic vibe, you know. The coastlines still sometimes look a bit weird, obviously, but that's just, you know, you don't have really a random fractal generation system in this toolset. Over here, I'll fill in this nook over here. Just didn't sit well with me. Over here, there's also a bit too wiggly of a coastline. So let's instead actually go ahead and do something interesting. So this is going to be the outflow of a large river. In this case, since I know there's going to be a river, we can already go ahead and just, you know, put it in there. So let's go down size-wise to about 6 is what I usually use with rivers. I have this very vague setup of what sizes I use for different things based on these about 40 or so maps I did before in Inkarnate. You know, the large world map I showed earlier where I put together all the things. That's where I just kind of decided on for myself, hey, about that size. Mm-hmm. Okay, I had to read something really quick. So let's just put in a winding, snaking river over here. For how rivers flow, obviously the water, usually unless magic happens here, involves involves taking the easy way. You know, it always takes the path of least resistance. You can, for example, just go ahead and start with the mountains and the hills first, and then just, you know, go from there. You know, consider, oh, there's hills over there and over there, there's a flat line in between, a river might snake through there, you know, go by that logic. This time around, I've decided I want a river early. I'll just go with whatever works here. So essentially, I'll have to go and adjust the geography to the river in this case. Both ways obviously work equally well, though basically doing the river later lends itself to some more ease of use. Okay, so to make the river look a bit more realistic, what I do is just expand it on some places. You know, rivers just aren't the same exact width at every single point, obviously. So yeah, just feel free to enlarge it here and there, even with just a little at times. Works easy enough. So what we're gonna do as well, I've decided, since I like mountains, we're gonna put in a bit of a mountain range over here. So let's go ahead, select my favorite mountains. I go down to about 50% for the mountains. That's just, again, one of those values I've decided for myself looks nice enough, and then just draw them in. There, a nice bowl shape here. I'm gonna add some more over here to explain how the river flows. There. And over here. Okay, so now I actually need to go ahead and redo some small landmasses here. In this case, the mountain is kind of reaching into the sea over here, so let's fix that. There we go. Same down here, actually. There, that works. And over here, the mountain is reaching into the river. That's not necessarily too bad. Most people wouldn't really see it probably even. Oop, I won't add. There we go. But I'll just redraw the flow of the river here just a little bit. Okay, let's go like this. And then we're just gonna enlarge the rest of the river down here, because a lot of rainfall and snow melting from these mountains will lead to some more water gathering and kind of like enlarging the river. That's something we're gonna do closer to the end, once we have some other things set down. So for now, we're gonna stick with the upper right continent as basically our testing ground. The rest of the stuff maybe we'll do later, or just skip over that, depending on what you guys want, if you have a preference or not. Okay, so we have a major mountainous area, we have a river, now it's time to add some textures. So essentially, I just start with some green around places where I know there's gonna be grasslands, or where I want to have grasslands, you know, and just leave some of the gray brownish, what's the word? I like words, guys. And yeah, the auto layering is actually one of the things why I'm really happy about the tool. It does a lot of the annoying work for you. There's gonna be instances, we may see that a little later, where it doesn't work quite so good, but yeah, largely it does the job for you. Okay, so once again, hopefully without lacking too many words, I'll just leave the base texture here and there, paint largely in the green, and then maybe, you know, do some reverse, just add some more of that stuff. Right now, a lot of that will look fairly blatant, but once we set down a lot of the other stuff, it will all blend together. That's also one of the key issues when you do mapping cartography of any sort. Don't look at the intermediate stages and be like, this looks bad, let's not do that. You need to pull through at some point and just be like, yeah, I know right now it doesn't look great, but what when it's done? How does it look then? Because that's obviously the key issue. And yeah, as I mentioned, just it will look a lot different later. So next up, we have the river. Rivers are usually, obviously, fairly healthy for farming and the like, so we're just gonna add some of the brighter green. Especially down here with the mountains, there's gonna be a lot of, as I mentioned, drainage water coming in. Be sure to not paint it everywhere, unless if you do, it begins to look a bit samey. Just like that. Down here near the coast we can add some. And again, it doesn't look exactly great right now. That's gonna change later down the line though. So let's actually go ahead, put in a small, fairly dry area over here. Some of that dusty, sandy texture here. And you know what? Let's deepen it a little bit more into nearly desert-like. That's a fairly harsh transition. Let's see if we maybe have something. Yeah, that works better. There. Now we just need to delete that texture down here again, or paint it with the baseline green I use. And then we have a kind of a dusty valley over here. Like all the rainwater drains to the south over here, and over here it drains into the basin itself. That's gonna be how we'll play this. So let's go ahead and actually do these drainages now. Zoom in a fair bit, and then we just subtract the landmass again. And as before, just, you know, paint wriggly lines is essentially the whole idea. You can have them connect, just like that. Add some more from the surrounding mountains. And where they connect, consider enlarging the river flow a little bit. And when you merge it into the main river, just consider giving it a bit of a soft, gradual flow into the actual stream direction, you know? There we go. Okay, down here, as I mentioned, stuff is gonna drain towards the ocean. So, kind of like that. I mean, these are fairly detailed rivers already. In the end, you may not see overly much of them, but they add some amount of flair to it, I feel. Now we come to the mountains over here. And here we're actually going to do a bit of something more pretty. We're going to make this here a bit of a lake. Just like that. And I know since I've used it a lot, we have some waterfall symbols over here. So we're just gonna use one of those. And there we go. And that's already a nice little detail. And I'm pretty sure if you guys are interested in map making, you're probably at least somewhat experienced in world building, and I don't need to tell you to just, you know, how to do these things, how to come up with what is where. Just do it as per normal. And if you do need it, just consider what looks pretty, you know, what do you want where, and go from there. And since we're at fantasy mapping, also consider not everything needs to make absolute real-world sense. Like there's what's kind of called the river police in map making. A lot of people, when they do map making, they have major rivers split into 2 rivers, you know, like one big river split into lesser rivers. That's usually not happening. Like, if it's happening, then not for long. That's just how rivers largely work, unless there's obviously magic or human engineering involved. But basically, if you need splitting rivers, go for it, it's fantasy. Especially in, for example, Exile, you can just be like, yeah, the twin river gods bitched at each other, and so they decided, yeah, each takes half of the river and goes another way. There. Okay, so usually once I'm done with the first texturing step, I decide if I want to do natural landscaping first or placing civilization first. In this case, I'm going to go with civilization first. So we go back to the object tool, and from our list select ourselves some nice cities and the like. Sorry. So let's actually go with, where do we have them? Up here. The normal city symbols. I usually have these symbols at around 30%. Again, number I just adapted to. I kind of found out this is a solid value that works for me. Let's go from there. So let's say 2 major cities over here. Let's make it a 3rd one down here, actually, because that suits itself fairly nicely. Let's use the capital. And that one will actually blow up a little bit more. There we go. So now we have 3 major cities in this area. One of them near the kind of exit of the river bay, you could say. Probably does a lot of shipping and stuff like that. You have one over here. I can imagine there's going to be lots of farming in the adjacent villages. And down here, this would be essentially the city where there's the largest traffic over this massive island down to the other continent, for example. So from there, I'll just take the step and add some villages. For villages, I'll just take the pattern tool and use either town 1, town 2, or village. You can use them in actual city maps to, you know, represent entire city regions or individual houses if you want to go detailed. I use them as a shorthand for Hirby village. So let's zoom in again. Let's go to maybe 30-ish% here and just slap them down. Sometimes I'll just place 2 at once, you know, sometimes single ones. And this over here is a very tightly clustered section of villages and the like. Down here we're gonna have only 1 or 2 in the shadow of the mountains. And over here maybe mining town of sorts. And then we have the remaining lands towards the river. Let's space out some ones. Okay, that's way too big. Let's delete that one. There we go. And that's already enough for my taste. We have a fair few villages around. Actually, there's maybe 1 or 2 more we can place in here. And on the outside of the mountains, actually, you know? When ships pass through. Yeah, that looks nice. That looks nice. Let's go with that. So from here on, we're gonna start with the other natural landscaping, basically. So we're gonna start with, say, my normal trees. Let's set them at about 50%. Yeah, that's large enough. And then I'm gonna have to decide where do we want to have forests. So near the northern edge, and especially here in the center of the plain, we have a fairly gray brownish area. We're not going to place much trees there. Some scattered ones, but this area is just not as fertile as the rest, you know? Same over here, to the right of the mountainside here. There's going to be a large patch where there's not going to be too much. And I'll probably go ahead and do that entire segment to the east here with only sparse vegetation. Not too much. The rest, though, over here, around the coastline, around the river in that region, I'll be fairly dense with the forests. So let's zoom in again, now that we know where we want what, and start applying. So a bit of a large forest near the city here. Some trees here and there always help to give it flair. And especially with the trees here, those icons are some of the most easy to place. They just flow straight from the tip. Really works nicely. It's actually one of the things I really like about Inkarnate once again is that just the flow of these icons sometimes just works really well and you can get really, really pretty shapes. So down here, a fair bit of forest, but they more or less carved a way through the forest over here for ease of travel, so we're gonna use that and have that be kind of like fairly visible over here. A bit over here, nuzzle near the mountains, looks good. The more wild valley over here, where all the rivers pool together, can be fairly heavily forested. Not many people living there, actually. Like that. Yeah. And if you actually take a look closer now, you can see that the auto layering actually starts to come apart a little bit, especially over here, for example. You can see that the trees are sometimes overlain by the mountains, and down here as well. We can try fixing this, but as you can see, the problem is that a lot of symbols get selected. Mountain nuzzling tree methodology. Yeah. I've always said, jokingly, if I'm an exalt, I'm the exalt of cartography. So yeah, these layering issues, you can try to fix them. In most situations, though, personally, I'm more like, you know, nobody's gonna really see it all that much. Over here, we can maybe go with that. Nah. Doesn't easily work over here. Okay, so we'll just have to let it be over here. Again, if you're zoomed all the way out, it's not easily noticeable. And especially once you have a lot more stuff laying down, it's gonna vanish in the thick of things, you could say. So now let's continue with the forestation down here. By the way, guys, gotta have to say thank you all for coming out. I'm very happy that I'm not sitting here alone talking to myself. That was actually really making me nervous as fuck. So, as I mentioned, this area here is largely not all that fertile, so we're gonna place just a very few trees here and there. As the famous person would say, just some happy little trees. No accidents, just happy little trees. So, up here again, bit more of a very thick forest. Let's go with that, yeah. That looks good. I'm kidding with what, Modover? Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. He had the right attitude about that kind of stuff. Applies to mapping as much as to actual, painting. Thanks, Angela. Really happy to hear that. Do I read that right, that you're having to leave now? Okay, so as I mentioned, we're gonna be pretty sparse in that region over here. Basically towards the coast. Doesn't mean we don't put any trees down there or no dense regions whatsoever. Yeah, Angela, I'm gonna, if I remember, link you later the YouTube video. I'm gonna upload this to YouTube, and hopefully remember to link you the exact timestamp about the whole landscaping thing I mentioned earlier with the landmasses. Thanks for tuning in. Very, very much appreciated. You do awesome work, and yeah, see you soon. So yeah, as I was just mentioning, being sparse with the trees doesn't mean no trees at all, obviously. So just be sure to space them out a little bit. Now we're gonna just add some trees along the coastline here. Actually, I've never read a single book on map making. And thanks. Hopefully gonna catch you soon. Okay, so yeah, we are currently greening the coastline. Okay, that should largely do the trick. Some more up here, actually. There. That should leave us with a already fairly decent looking area up here. So from here on, let's see what else we may want or need. I know one thing I do want, namely a couple dead trees. Because that region over here is really, really unhealthy. So let's add that. Maybe one or two dead trees along the region over here, just natural decay sometimes happening. Doesn't always have to be a crypt ghoul nearby. There. And now, what else do we want? We could add a few hills, maybe. Oh, yeah, I also forgot. The hill icons are actually massively big. So let's scale it down some more and just a couple hills up here. There, that already looks pretty decent. Let's go ahead, put one over here, so it looks like a nearly enclosed region. Okay, and up here we'll just add a few more. Something along those lines, yeah. That looks pretty decent. Let's look through the icons. Do we have anything else we want? I'm pretty satisfied right now. So let's check the main icons. We could, for example, go ahead and actually add some cracked ground in the desert, but I think that's going a bit too far. Instead, though, we could also add some farm fields or stuff like that. Usually they are intended for, I feel at least, more detailed maps where you have small villages and stuff like that. But for flavor, they also work quite well. If you look at that, gives it a nice little bit of flavor here. Have to move it about. Sure, let's slap a fortress down at some place. How about near that dead area? To be completely generic fantasy, maybe there's a whole bunch of undead coming out of there. Or desert raiders or stuff like that, you know? Whatever works for you. And yeah, I'd actually probably leave it at that over here. That's looking pretty dope, I feel. Got a nice style. Plenty of trees, plenty of open spaces still left, and if you actually take a closer look, you see that the whole... yeah, thanks for tuning in, Melova. See you later as well. So yeah, as I was saying, the areas where the textures may have looked a bit awkward earlier, with the whole visual noise effect, they are now just blending in together. So the basic idea why I mentioned earlier textures are so important is because they generate a bit of visual noise, basically, and at some point things just start to flow together. If you actually look closely at a lot of things that use textures, be it in mapping or in art, it doesn't always look too great in detail, and it only works if you see the larger picture. In this case here, if we go in all way too deep, you can immediately see the whole layering issues, you know? You can see if we scroll over here that some of these textures just look a bit awkward at some points. You know, that tree here all alone, the dead tree one, just looks a bit weird, but if you actually zoom out and look at it in its totality, it just looks good, I feel, you know? So that's more or less the key in how I approach mapping, you know, just with enough content and enough things that look good. The few parts that look bad can't be seen. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a trick there. So yeah, that's essentially, yeah, Inkarnate step 1. So someone asked me to show off something else then. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna save this out here. Gonna take a quick moment, and while that's happening, I'm gonna take a drink. Be right back. I am back. Thanks for waiting. So next up, what I'm gonna do is show you how to basically assemble multiple maps into a larger one in Photoshop. Someone asked explicitly for that, so I'm gonna show you. It's not that big of a deal though, actually, once you get down to things. So, save the file here real quick. So, we're gonna quickly head over to Photoshop. And what we're doing here is essentially loading up the map I just downloaded. The one we just made. There we go. So, essentially, the big problem you have, let me actually showcase that in the world map file. Let me take a quick moment to load up as well. It's a fairly decently sized Photoshop file by now. Ah, there we go. Guides be gone. Okay, so to showcase you in some more detail, I've assembled these maps, and there's always the big black stroke between them, you know? If you actually already take a closer look, you know, you'll notice that not everything lines up perfectly. Not everything has the exact same sizes. Sometimes there's small positions not correct. That all gets subsumed through these big black bars. If we go ahead and, for example, just reduce the grid into just half of what it is, you can see that things start to become much more apparent. say down here is, for example, you expect the stem of the tree down here. You know, it should be there, but it isn't. The thinner you go, obviously, the more problematic this issue becomes. And if you just remove the grid, you can't fully assemble them. So you always need to have that grid. But let's start from here and show how that works. So first thing I do is obviously just essentially use the image and double the canvas size. So double width. That means we have space for an entire second map. So now I'm gonna go ahead and return to Inkarnate real quick. And I'll just have to visualize and memorize roughly at which point the landmass ends, how it flows. You know, at the moment, the landmass would be flowing down right from here and continue onward, as you see with the cursor's movement. So let's go ahead, get out of this map. Yeah, I saved it. Yes, I did. We're gonna create a new pro map. And then I'll just draw in the line I suspect where it should be. So let's paint in the landmass, something along those lines. And let's say there's actually a larger area over here still. Okay, then I download this map. We head over back to Photoshop. And this is just essentially a bit of having to judge where things go. So we're gonna assemble it here, and we can already see this doesn't quite fully work out. What we also have to do is actually go ahead and create our grid lines. So I'm just gonna take the easy way here, select that stuff, and paint it black. Okay, so move it a bit to the right, actually. There we go. And yeah, this doesn't quite work out. So we just have to go back to Inkarnate and do it like that. Download it again, and that's already, honestly, how I do this. Just memorize how the edges work and go from there. So there's actually a bit of a trick to make this a little bit easier as well. So we currently have the right section here placed in, and I'm gonna create this to a smart object. What this does is basically just create a file in Photoshop that retains all the original properties. I double click on that and it opens like a normal file, like as it were any other file, right? So we're gonna go ahead, slap in the updated version. You can see if I make it visible to the left over here. Oh, wait, I forgot. I still have that active. Sorry, my bad. That was a fail. So yeah, basically, to recap, I right-clicked on the layer and told it convert to smart object, and then just double-clicked on the icon in front of the name. That opens it like any other Photoshop file. I placed the file in there, and if I make it visible and invisible, you see down to the left here, you know, there's a difference. I just hit save, and I tap back to the actual thing, and now we see we are overkilling it. So once more, back to Inkarnate, subtract some landmass, something like that. We go back to Photoshop, and that just continues. You know, you just go into the smart object, place it in again, save it, and it's beginning to be workable, especially if you zoom out, you know. Could be that there's a bit of a connecting issue here, but in detail, again, it looks a bit less graceful. If you zoom out, though, you won't really notice it, most likely. And yeah, from there on, I just have to continue. For example, over here we have these hills. Sorry. And these hills we just go back to Inkarnate once again, roughly estimate where they are, and paint them in. Kind of like that. And once again, same as per usual, we save it out. We go to Photoshop, into the smart object, place a file there, save it, and see for ourselves. And this is at some point just a training. You know, this is already a pretty okay fit. We need to move the initial ones a bit up some more, and probably reduce the icon size a little bit again. But that's how you do it. Same thing with the rivers, just draw multiple lines, you know, in the vicinity, and see which one works closest, and approach from there. That's all I did, even with this fairly large map, you know? This is all it took. It's a bit labor intensive, but it's the best way you can go about it, and I feel this is giving you some nice results, and honestly, I'm not even sure these black grid lines are all that disturbing. It gives it kind of a very specific vibe. Not sure how to describe it best, but I feel it just works. Okay, so. And yeah, sorry if Photoshop is a fair bit low quality here. I'm still working to find out which streaming options work best. Okay, so now we come to the next part. Actual Photoshop mapping. This is gonna be a bit different from what we've done up until now. Okay, so I've set up a baseline. This baseline is the one I have been using for a long time by now. Just, it has everything I need. And I'll go through it step by step real quick. So, I'm actually going to show you how to create this baseline texture. I have a baseline texture I use just as, obviously, baseline. This is where I just mix and match several textures and effects over one another, and the layering effect, you know, with them blending into one another, just creates this fairly mixed, non-repetitive look. Like the very base texture, just to show you guys real quick. The absolute base texture I use is fairly repetitive. You should see it very easily. There's always this somewhat lighter area, you know, stacked one over the other, and you can just see it very, very clearly. This is self-repeating. But again, that doesn't matter, because we have a whole lot of other stuff. And that stuff makes it workable. There we go. Okay, so the absolute key to how this mapping style works is just these three layers. The mountains, low, mid, and high. This is what I consider the key. So each of those has a bevel and emboss effect. What these do is essentially just give it a pseudo three-dimensional look. So if I just draw it, you can see there's a bright light lit up top. You know, there's the raised effect, and at the bottom there's an additional shadow. And each of those, as you can see here relatively easily, actually let's use a bit of a brown. That makes it probably easier to see. Has a more and more intense rays in there. That's all that makes this map style pop off as much as it does. And obviously a lot of texture layering, but that's something I'll get to later. So, as mentioned, I'm gonna go through this and show you how it all works. To do that, we're gonna start with a new baseline, just so you know how to do it. What you need first is the bucket tool, set to filling with a pattern, and a grass-like pattern. Whatever that one may be. Like, let's use this one so you can see how the tiling effect gets defeated really, really easily. So once we have that one, we're gonna go ahead, create ourselves a new layer on top of the grass layer. We're gonna press this thing over here. It goes to the default fore and background colors, black and white. We go to filter, we render, and we render some clouds. So next we're gonna basically start blending things together. This works easiest by just up here. You have this drop-down menu. Currently there's normal. You can just go through them and see how it all affects things. They all have a detailed explanation of how they work and how they basically mix these colors together. But for us to know, it's just one thing. Try out which works best. Don't always go full opacity. You know, here, for example, we can just use about 25%. Let's make a new layer. Render some more clouds until we find one that looks nice. And try with a different one. For example, I found out recently that multiply gives some nice darker patches. So this already reduces the tiling effect quite a bit. What we're going to do next is take ourselves a new pattern. And this time we're going to go with essentially kind of a sandy one, like just dirt, essentially. Once again, we go through various options here to see what would affect the map best. We're going to play with the opacity again. And if you find something that works for you, run with it. This here a little less intense might work. Yeah, that gives it, if you look closer, there's these lines in there now. That's kind of the effect we're going for, just something to break up the monotony. Okay, so now we have a baseline. The baseline we have now looks a fair bit different to the other one. This here is much more neutral. That doesn't really mean anything bad though. What we're gonna do next is, again, texture layering. That's where the texture layering actually begins to shine over here. So we're gonna take ourselves the pattern stamp tool, and we're gonna take ourselves a brush. In this case, I have a scatter brush. What the scatter brush does, in very short, easy explanation, for those of you not familiar with it, you can see it just splatters across. There's no real rhyme or reason to how it works. It just does. You can create these brushes relatively easily. You can just find various brushes online. I, for example, found these brushes here. They are kind of like space nebula stuff like that, you know? And just blend them together in a certain way. Let's show that off. For those of you familiar, words are hard, just look at the various options I've chosen here. Sorry. I do have a spacing set, so it doesn't just keep drawing one after another in high speed, but as you can see, there's always these steps, you know? That's very important. Next, the shape dynamics. I've set the size jitter. That just means they are either very large or very small, up to 100% difference from the baseline. And yeah, that just means they bring more randomness. Same with the angle jitter. If you look at the preview down here, they always go in the same direction. If I up the angle jitter, they just turn around in all manner of places. That's also something we want. Next, we go with scattering, which just means if I disable it, you can see down here, it becomes a stricter line versus a more disparate, wider spaced brush. We give it also a dual brush. In that case, I've just taken a different one of these nebula brushes, slapped it on top, and they are just, to make something complicated sound really easy, they just calculate them into one another and give you a much more random outcome. If you're not understanding anything I'm just telling you, don't worry. If you want, I can provide you with that brush. Really easy. The transfer is just some fading, basically. If you look at the preview down here, when I turn it on and off, you can see the effect. Again, just take these values, and largely we have a bit of a smoothing active. That's just a standard thing that Photoshop does with a lot of brushes nowadays. Not sure I actually intentionally set that up or not. And what we're doing now, we just take the pattern stamp tool, which lets us paint with a pattern. If I just go very directly into showcase mode, you can see if I select this, I'm essentially drawing wood. And we're gonna make use of that. So we're gonna take our baseline texture, the grass texture again, set the opacity fairly low, and on a new layer just draw in a little bit. Okay, we need to up the opacity, obviously. There we go. We see some slight change. This just lightens the mood of the map again. We create new layers. Basically, I'm just gonna go ahead and create many new layers now. And start to just draw with various textures. And as with Inkarnate before, this whole thing is about at what point do you no longer see the tiling effect, you know? That point will come. And just like before, you also need to be aware you can always start blending. So let's go ahead. A fairly dense texture over here. And this is obviously overpowering, so we'll just go ahead and see if we have anything that makes it more interesting look-wise. That doesn't give us much. That actually looks pretty nice. Lighten it up some more. So the difference before and after is fairly distinct on this one. We're gonna start a new layer once again. And just keep basically slapping texture on texture for a little while until we are satisfied. So over here, for example, this is a fairly dark texture. Let's actually leave the middle and the left and bottom parts here a bit more free of that texture for more variety. And let's see how those interact. With multiply, they actually give us some nice dark patches. And while it's still there, you can already see that the whole tiling effect begins to fade out more and more the more textures we add. That's kind of the whole intention behind this. We're gonna take a different grass texture this time around. And again, as I mentioned before, this is just layer, 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 layer. And this is already a nice looking baseline. From this, we could start actually working on the map. So let's do that. So, mountains, right? What do we need for mountains? We need these three pre-prepared settings. Let's take a look at them. The bevel and the boss effect. So again, this is the three-dimensional effect. And just take a quick look at the details as I've set them up in here. Essentially, depth 150%. The depth percentage just is how steep it looks. You know, if you have a 800% depth, it looks or tries to simulate a very, very steep angle. And this is also another moment where I need to take a drink. Just a second, please. And I'm back. Freshly hydrated. Okay, by now you should have plenty of time to check out the various values here. Important is the depth and the size, I think, are the most key elements, because those are gonna change. On the contour front, we have an additional contour that just gives it a bit more of a sharper contour where the raised and lowered sections differ. We also have set up a texture. That's also fairly crucial. Basically, we have a mountain-like texture set up, that kind of is used as a bit of a mixture, basically. It just mixes what we paint with the texture provided in here, and the outcome will always look mountainous. Again, if you want these textures or want these tools, let me know. I'm more than willing to send you over a Photoshop file with all these basics set up. Okay, so the middle mountains, they have 3 pixels higher size, less depth. These highlight and shadow modes are the same as before. I think the contour got a little bit changed, and the texture is still there. And lastly, the high mountains there actually have still a larger size. I think the highlights got upped a little bit, and the contour still got dropped down. Credit where credit is due. I didn't come up with these mountain layers. They are actually from the tutorial I mentioned earlier, which I will gladly be pointing you towards. It's called, let me take a look, Creating Mountains and Other Terrains in Photoshop by Pasi Soini. Actually found this on the Cartographers Guild about 10 years ago. Okay, back to our map over here. So we're gonna go back to our mountains. And for this, for the sake of doing it the easy way so you can follow along, we're gonna take a brush, just a normal round brush, hardness 0%, and opacity, let's say 25%. And then we just start drawing in the mountain. Oh, wait. I am the wrong tool. We need to do this in the pattern stamp tool. So once again, 0 hardness, let's say about 200 pixels in size, opacity 25%, and the texture, we're going to choose a mountainous texture. You can take various mountain textures to try out. Again, this is the texture I've been using for around about 10 years by now. If you want it, once again, let me know. So we're gonna brush this in very carefully. Actually gonna go ahead and reduce the opacity some more. And just multi-click this in. So we want a mountain that is basically going along the northern route here. Okay, so we come to the mid-mountains, and here we start significantly reducing the diameter of a brush, upping the opacity a little bit, and actually going ahead and adding some hardness, say 20%. And just draw in the route the mountains will take. Like the peaks, essentially. So essentially the mountains will follow this route over here, and we obviously need some ridges to support this. So let's draw in the ridges. Just like that. Okay, and then we come to the high mountains. We go ahead, we up our opacity a significant bit, say about 33%. We go to, say, size 12 and hardness 50% on the brush tip. And then we just draw in the very sharp mountain tops. And you can already see the 3-dimensional effect is beginning to do work. This is just, again, a fairly click-intensive thing, so if you hear the mouse a bit in the background, I am sorry. That's just part of the business. Okay, so this is the first step. It doesn't look like anything sensible right now, right? It just looks fairly bad. That's always the case, don't worry. We're gonna go back to the medium mountains. We're gonna increase the size again, down the hardness to 0 or so, and then we're gonna just start basically drawing beneath the highest peaks again. The way I'm doing this is essentially I'm gonna define the rough mountain first with the lowest level, add some detail with the mediums, and then go to the actual peaks. Once I know the peaks, I can start doing a lot more, especially on the lower levels as well. So we are now again at the low levels. And we're just gonna beef up the mountains now a little bit, you know? And there we go, it already starts to look a lot better, you know? Less anemic, you could say. And then we go back to the high mountains again, and now I'm gonna be fairly aggressive. A very, very hard brush, very small. And I'm just gonna define these peaks some more. Add a lot more of these small offshoots here and there, you know? Just randomly place them here and there, and that will give the whole thing a lot more life, essentially. And this doesn't maybe look like much at first, but if you take a step back once you're done, you will see that it actually works. It just does. It gives you a nice look. Plus, every time you can do this, mountains will come out a slight bit different here and there. There we go. It already looks a lot more sensible. A lot of the unpleasantness still comes from basically the map being near entirely empty. So what you can do as well is go ahead and get yourself a snow texture. And just some of the highest tips, you know, just add some snow there. Kind of like that. And that, once again, gives it a bit more of an interesting look. You can go back down to the various heights now and just start adding more flair, you know, stricter defined ridge lines, expand the mountains, maybe delete some, you know. We're gonna actually do that in a few moments here. Just take the eraser tool with a, let's say, 25% opacity, low hardness, low size, and just go to the low mountains and just start erasing some of them, you know, to make the ridgelines a bit more defined, essentially. You can also do that with the medium mountains to just give it a bit more definition here and there. It's, again, largely playing around, seeing what works for your map, for the effect you're going for. And I think in the end you can come to some very, very beautiful results. There, these are already pretty decent looking mountains. So next up, we're actually gonna go quickly to the forests, since we are beginning to near the end time for the stream. So for the forests, I have created a new brush as well. So this brush, to show you real quick, no, apparently that was the wrong brush. Give me a moment to take a look. Should be this one? Yeah. Okay, so this is the right brush. And as you can see, it gives out a whole lot of wonderful pixels. So I'm gonna explain how this works. First of all, the forests have a bunch of effects applied to them. First of all, they have, like the mountains, a very, very slight three-dimensional effect. I have a color overlay. In this case, we can deactivate that. You can see it's just for colorizing them to a certain climate look. Basically, the map I made last with this template has been kind of like a, yeah, more jungle style map. So I wanted much brighter forests than the darker ones I have over here. And the important part is actually the drop shadow. Just a very tiny drop shadow. And if you see difference, it just gives it a whole lot more volume. The brush itself is actually a lot easy. a lot easier to make than the last one. You just need a 3 pixel size baseline brush. There you go, size 3 pixels, hardness 100%, and a spacing depending on what you want. I'm always varying the spacing over here. The shape dynamics, you have a size jitter, just to have different sized trees. You can easily see here some dots are larger than others. And then is scattering on both axes to the maximum. And the count again can increase or decrease the density of the forest you design. That's something I always vary as well. And then you just click and drag and yeah, create forests. That's all it takes. And again, this is once more a bit more time intense than everything else, but hey, it's how it works. Mapping isn't usually a thing you do in a couple minutes. It's something you need a time investment for, a vision for, and just the will to actually do what it takes. And yeah, we're just gonna paint that over a lot of the mountainous areas, since, yeah, you know, a lot of mountains have forests on them. And especially in the valleys between, that always looks pretty dope. What you need to be aware of is if you use the same motion. Has Photoshop died on me? Maybe it did. Oh, right. Right, sorry. Still had a alpha mask here. Sorry. What you need to be aware of is if you do a lot of the same motion to draw forests. You know, like over here, even if you paint over it several times, you can see these motions in the end. So what you have to do is just draw in a motion and then vary it up, add some circles, you know, vary the angle of attack basically. And yeah, that's how you get nice looking forests. And just like before, just click here and there in the plains, you know. A lot of plains have some trees here and there. That's what makes them interesting, because a flat, empty grassland is not all that interesting in most cases. And yeah, that's how I do the forests. Again, this is relatively quick and dirty, so it doesn't... it's not exactly up to my normal standards, but this is the mechanical way to do it. If you take your time and do it carefully, you know, with more of a time to see how does this work, how does this affect it, does the second try look better, that's how you do the real good maps. So, and as last thing in Photoshop, I'm gonna show you what Angela asked earlier, namely the whole how do I do landmasses. Like, in this map over here, we've had no water whatsoever. Let's do one with water. Let's say an island. So, I'm gonna start with a blank map, I'm gonna go to default colors, and I'm gonna go ahead and render clouds. We know the step by now. Then I go to the adjustments, image adjustments, to threshold, and basically, oh wait, I forgot one important thing. I need this to be in the RGB color mode. Very important. There we go. If you don't know the difference between CMYK and RGB, just work in RGB. Basically, RGB is for screen, CMYK is for print. You can print RGB by converting it. You lose some color definition here and there, but for general normal usage, stick with RGB most of the time. Okay, so as mentioned before, we go to threshold. We're gonna go ahead and make it so that we have a lot of individual fractals over here. Then click OK. We go into the channels tab, which is where the basically the 4 channels are: the complete RGB channel, the only red, the only green, the only blue. If you have no idea what these are for, don't worry. Just hold Control, click on the RGB on the image, and you can see we have things selected, you know? I'm not sure if it's coming across nicely in the stream, but there's like these wandering ant lines. You know them from various other tools. Then we need to unlock the layer. I should do that by just copying it and deleting the original. and just hit delete. All the white is gone. That's what we want. Let's start a new one where we want our map to be. And then I'm gonna just select the polygon lasso. And honestly, just go ahead, take out shapes, put them in the new map, and just layer these shapes over one another to create interesting coastlines. Say, let's connect these over here. You know? Let's do another one. This one looks nice. There we go. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's actually go ahead, connect that up here. Kind of like a hammerhead up here. And then we're gonna bridge this gap over here. We're gonna do that by just taking any of those fractals we like this over here, and slap it in. And then we're gonna take all the layers, basically render them down to a single one. Words are hard again. And just fill in the space in between with black. And if you can see, the black we draw is fairly fuzzy, while these fractals we generated are completely crystal clear coastlines. That's one of the reasons why I like these so much. They are extremely clear. Okay, there we go. And now we have ourselves an island shape. And what you need to do now, if you want to do basically, let's start like this. You're gonna take the water texture, slap it down, and then we're gonna have to add the texture to the island. We do this like before, except, you know, if I fill everything up, you know, everything is suddenly green. Where's the water? Hold Alt, click between the two layers. And this basically functions like an alpha mask. Essentially, if you look just at this layer over here, wherever there's black, stuff that we have, what's it called, slotted in like this with the Alt click, will apply only to that stuff. So now we have that wonderful thing. Create a new layer, also slap it in there, and then just, as before, start layering. Let's take this one over here. Take a nice brush. And yeah, we've done this whole process before. It's really essentially that simple. You know? A bit of that stuff. Let's say multiply. Fairly low. Yeah, that works nice. And yeah, just continue going from there. Again, if you need these tools I've presented you, let me know. I'm again more than willing to share. And yeah, this is essentially the whole process I'm going through in short form. There's a lot more detail, obviously, and there's a lot of training involved, but essentially that's just the base approach. So yeah, that's gonna be the Photoshop segment here. And essentially the last segment's gonna be really short. I'm just gonna show you some things with Illustrator. And let's hop over there actually. Okay, so Illustrator. The quickest example I do have for you is actually, let's say this over here. If you don't know Illustrator or don't have access to it or don't want to spend a lot of money for it, because damn, that shit costs money, consider using Inkscape. A lot of the stuff should be roughly similar, so, you know, there's no big deal to that. Okay, so essentially, this is a vector-based graphics tool. What that means, in case you're uninitiated, there's two differences in how graphics work. You can have vector graphics, or you can have whatchamacallit? What's so hard? Damn. Raster graphics. There. Raster graphics is the classic, there's a pixel there, it has color X, Y, and Z. Vectors, on the other hand, are mathematical formulas, and you can zoom into them as much as you want. And I'm seeing right now, apparently Illustrator is not being transmitted properly. It doesn't show the actual content of the file, goddammit. Okay, no thanks, that's not what I want. Well, apparently that part has to wait. Because it doesn't do what I want it to do. Like, completely. Okay, I mean, Illustrator is a fairly special case and may require either some additional attention or, you know, can be skipped outright. I think I'm gonna call it here. Like, we've had nearly 2 full hours of this. I think I've talked way too much technical detail in the whole Photoshop section. But I do hope that you've found some new and interesting ways to deal with mapping. This was just more or less a general overview. If you are interested, I can do more streams, showcase some more tricks and tips and how I approach mapping and, you know, actual watch me create a map. Stuff like that, you know. There's still a lot of stuff in the detail, essentially. But again, yeah, a bit more of a difficult thing to showcase. Always happy. Thanks for being here. To everyone who's still around, to everyone who has been here at any given point. As per usual, I'm more than willing to help. I do have a Discord server specifically set up for these types of things. If you're interested, head over there. You know, ask me things. Give me suggestions, you know. If you need the tools, head over there, ask me. Just PM me on Discord if you know me from the Exalted moderation team or whatever. Yeah, I'm more than willing to let you guys in on the secret tips and tricks of the trade. And yeah, as I said, gonna call it here before I start talking in circles again. I hope you've enjoyed it, at least to some degree. This was my first live streaming experience. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.